Welcome, aloha. I am Martha Hanson. I'm Director of Donor Relations here at Hawaii Community Foundation, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here tonight. I wanted to acknowledge some colleagues who are with us tonight. Mike Akane, there he is. He is President and Chief Executive Officer. We have my boss, Kate Lloyd, who's head of our Donor Relations Department, right there. Amy Lurson, who is Senior Vice President of Community Grants and Investments. Miles Shibata, who I'm sure many of you know, he's with our development team. If you have a donor advised fund, you probably know Kevin Rapp, who's in the back there. And I think we have a senior fellow here. I think his name is Kelvin Takeda, and perhaps you might have met him in an earlier life.
Referring to the CEO.
That's right. These Legacy Society events we do about 2 or 3 times a year, and we do them so we all get a chance to get to know each other better. We also like to have dialogues about giving trends and evolving community needs, and we also like to keep you informed about our work that you enable us to do. We thought tonight's topic would be quite a draw, and so while we do a lot of our legacy events at lunchtime here in this room, we moved it to this evening so we would be able to accommodate more of you. We've also expanded the guest list a little bit. We have some people who aren't Legacy Society members, but they are donors to one of these organizations. So we're delighted to have our special guests with us too. When we think about conventional charitable causes, we think of healthcare, human services, education, the arts, but disseminating information is not top of mind. But it was for Andrew Carnegie, whose largesse built more than 2,500 libraries across the country between 1883 and 1929. His biographer, David Nassau, has said, Carnegie's philanthropy turned libraries from being luxuries only available for a few to instruments of change available to all. That was another era, but access to information is just as important now as it was back at the turn of the earlier century. Today we have so much information that we don't know what to believe. And the saying, water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink, is certainly true of information today. There are some of you tonight who are here because you support PBS or HPR or Civil Beat annually, and there are those who have included one or more of these organizations in your legacy plans. And there are those who came before us, saw the need, and left means in their estate to ensure our community continues to have access to information to be a more informed civil society. Andrew Lee Yates Ward and Priscilla Camp Ward were 2 such people. They created Prison Lee Trust to support the charities important to them. Among those charities was PBS Hawaii, that continues to receive a gift each year from the Wards through their trust, although the Wards passed away more than 20 years ago. Your legacy gifts, too, will continue to support organizations and issues important to this community long after you're gone. And for your foresight and for your generosity, we thank you. Now, when I was growing up, Walter Cronkite would finish every newscast with, and that's the way it is. At that age, I didn't question him. I didn't doubt him. But it's not so simple today. And that's why we've invited 3 nonprofit news services to speak with us tonight and help us answer the question. And that's the way it is, or is it? So we have with us our Hawaii Community Foundation Senior Director of Communications, Lynelle Marble, and she will be our moderator, and she will introduce the panel.
Aloha. Hi, everyone. I just want to take a moment to first thank Martha. As you know, she oversees our donor services. And through these legacy events, she is always looking for relevant topics and community issues to bring forward to all of you. Tonight is no different. So thank you, Martha, for doing that and bringing this to us. I'm also really excited because in my conversation with all three of you beforehand, we realized that this is the first time they're all in the room together. And so to have them here talking about this great topic of what's real news today and how do we find it is incredibly honored. We're incredibly honored and privileged to have you here. So thank you so much for being here tonight. This evening, I'll just start the conversation with just a few questions. And then after that, towards the end, we'll take some questions from all of you in the audience. So please start thinking of them, and we'll call them out after. Before I get started, though, I'd just like to first briefly introduce our three esteemed panelists tonight. First, we have our editor and general manager of Civil Beat, Patti Epler.
Hi.
Patti has worked for Civil Beat since 2011 and has served as its editor since 2012. She has more than 30 years in the news industry and got her start in Alaska writing a column where she had to pretend to be, get this, a middle-aged man who drove an old Dodge car, had a little dog named Dum Dum, and a wife who annoyed him. So there's a lot more to that story. You can all ask Patti later on at the reception. But it was all up from there. She earned a Pulitzer for a series that she did in the Anchorage Daily News. Her career as a reporter and editor also took her to Washington State, Arizona, and of course here in Hawaii. Patti shared that she feels being a journalist is really a calling, and that her role is more than just a job. It's a lifestyle. Thank you, Patti, for being here.
Thank you.
with us.
That was nice. Thank you. Thanks. Hi.
Next, we have Jose Fajardo, President and General Manager of Hawaii Public Radio. Just over 2 years ago, Jose moved to Hawaii from Florida to take on his role at HPR. His career in broadcasting began 30 years ago when he took his first job as a reporter and newscaster. His passion for sharing local stories, making a difference in the community, and sharing in-depth coverage of issues kept him mainly in the nonprofit sector, where he has led in all aspects of broadcasting, from on-air to operations to management. In 2009, Jose received recognition as one of the 25 most influential local Hispanic community leaders by Ahoro Orlando magazine. And he's a native of Puerto Rico, and shared that he's happy to be here in Hawaii, living in an island community similar to what he experienced growing up. Thank you to President. And last, and not in any way in the least, we have Leslie Wilcox, who has served as CEO and president of PBS Hawaii since 2007. Before that, she worked for 34 years in print and broadcast journalism. Leslie decided back in middle school that she was going to be a journalist. A half a dozen years later, as a college freshman, she became the youngest full-time reporter hired by the Old Star Bulletin. The trigger for her career was reading the middle school newspaper and finding out that a girl who sat next to her every day in class had escaped war-torn Cambodia after losing all of her family in the killing fields. Leslie realized that she wanted more depth and knowledge in her life and to forget the superficial conversations. And she has done just that through the many meaningful stories that she shared throughout her career and now at PBS Hawaii. So please join me in welcoming Leslie, Jose, and Patti. So,
Well done,
are
cheers.
we done? Is that time's up? I'm just going to start with the question that is probably at the top of everyone's minds. Here in our current 24/7 news climate, how can we tell the difference between fake and real news? How do we know what's reliable nowadays?
It's really hard sometimes. There's so much stuff out there on the internet and in just all over the place. But you just have to do it. You just have to look for yourself. You have to educate yourself, I think, on how to decide if something is legitimate or not. And there's ways you can do that, starting with looking at the About Us section, for instance, on a website or that. But there are classes you can take online in it. We have a new news literacy page on Civil Beat where we link to different tools and techniques where you can even look up a photo and see if it's been doctored. There's Google Images and things like that that help you do that. So it's hard, but it's important, and you guys just have to do it for yourself. I mean, you can't really believe us all the time, so.
Yeah, well, part of the problem is also news is coming at us now like a fire hose. There was a time where only newspapers printed the news. Only broadcasters would broadcast the news. Now, anyone with a smart device, a telephone or an iPad or a computer, can go online and create their own source of news. We've all become somewhat journalists, but self-reporting what's going on around us. And with all this excess of coverage, especially on social media sites, we as citizens of this world have to really take it upon ourselves to kind of question everything that we see, especially online. That's, I think, where a lot of this fake news has been coming from. It hasn't been coming from the newspapers that you've depended on. It hasn't been coming from the broadcasters that you've depended on. It's come from these news sources online that can easily be adjusted by individuals just like you who hide behind a computer and create this. So as Patti said, we have to kind of take it upon ourselves to really double check our own sources that we're getting information from and break out of sometimes the bubbles that we create ourselves by only going to one source of information, really kind of going out and seeing what else is out there.
I think two words, due diligence. I think that's what we're all saying. I feel like I have to vet everything I read if I'm going to believe it. And it really takes a lot of work because, as you said, so much is coming at you. But I don't even go by the institution anymore or the general source. I really kind of look to reporters I respect and I follow their work. And sometimes that changes too. So it really is looking at the reports you get with a sense of skepticism and hope, of course. But what I've noticed in the years that I've talked to people to get information is that there are more and more people who are willing to hear the facts but believe in a different truth. And they completely, this is what they feel. And so that's what you have to look out for in your source of reporting.
Yeah, and if I may, one more thing, we as former journalists and a journalist, there was a code that we all worked off, which was to double check everything. You just didn't print something or put something on the air with one source. We always wanted to get two sources to verify the information. And a lot of times when we hear something, we see something on Facebook or any social media, we just assume because a friend of ours linked it or liked it that it's the truth. But if you double source it and go and find another source to verify that, I think a lot of times that's going to minimize some of that fake news that we're all bombarded with.
And how do you determine, though, what those reliable sources are now?
National Public Radio, NPR. Civil Beat, the news hour, There are, again, I think, going to those trusted sources that you have trusted all along. Those are the reliable ones, I think. Washington Post, New York Times, those institutions that have been providing that type of content. If it's on social media, if I see something on a social media feed, I don't believe it until I see it on a source that I've depended on for a long time.
So I'm not, I'm sorry,
No,
Leslie.
please.
I'm not quite as cynical, especially because, who's ever heard of Civil Beat, right? It's almost kind of misnamed, right? It's not like, Honolulu Beat or something like that, and there are many, many great news sources out there that you've probably never heard of, but we're a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News, which has more than 100 members, and things like Inside Climate News has won a Pulitzer now and is probably about to win another one. The Lens out of New Orleans. There's just so many that have names that you wouldn't recognize, but they're really great sources of news. So I wouldn't really be that afraid. You just have to learn how to check it out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really fascinated by how news institutions are covering lies. So just to share a little background, about 30 years ago, locally, and I think nationally too, news institutions were quite tried to be very, very neutral. So if a politician was lying, they would say, this is what he said today, and this is what he said last week. And you make the connection. Okay, so that was the case then, but now in this new age, the New York Times has decided that if someone says something that is not true and is apprised that the facts do not bear that out and continues to say it, they say that's a lie. The Boston Globe says, and we found this out from Sasha Pfeiffer, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who came to Honolulu last year. And the Boston Globe doesn't do that. They do not call it a lie. They look at the difference between what was said. So, and so that means some of these organizations are looking to you to make the connection, or they're making a conclusion for you. And either way, you've got to watch out. I mean, I think just, be buyer beware, even of information from people you believe are reliable. Yeah. Even my mom is wrong sometimes.
Well, all of you have long, well-respected careers in broadcasting and journalism. So now that you're at each of your individual outlets, what are you doing to ensure that the news that you put out is reliable?
Well, so we, as a public radio station, and we're connected with National Public Radio, we all agree to abide by a certain code of ethics, journalistic code of ethics. And we, for us as a nonprofit institution that depends almost solely on contributions from listeners just like you, they're always fundraising. If we violate the trust that we have with you, we're done. We don't have corporations that are giving us money just for marketing and advertising to reach your eardrums. You're giving us money because you trust us already. And so we take that very seriously. And so we have national news from NPR and other national sources in the BBC, and we're building up our local content. And our local journalism department makes sure they verify everything. We don't, we double check all of our sources, just as I said earlier, because we know that if we take a misstep and start to go down the road of being advocates for certain positions instead of journalists and reporting on the news, that we will lose your trust. If we lose your trust, we won't be able to fund the operation that we have.
At Civil Beat, we're in a little bit different position because we do original reporting almost solely. So that kind of starts with the reporter on the beat. We hire people that we really know and trust and have vetted to be great journalists. We have a level of editing that the stories have to go through. All of the other reporters, because we're such a small operation, sort of double check other people's work. But it really starts with, as Jose was saying, the sort of ethical standards that we adhere to. And so we abide by the Society of Professional Journalists standards, which are listed on our website. And we stick to that pretty closely. But I think it's mostly just you have to trust the people that work for you to do a great job and to always be asking questions, and then trust the editors to make sure that things don't sound funny or seem weird or whatever. But that's kind of how we do it. We have a very much of a frontline responsibility there,
Yeah,
I think.
And I think, and this holds true for PBS. I ran PBS stations in Florida and Texas. Our content that we put together is very different than commercial radio and commercial TV. Commercial broadcasters have one goal in mind, and that's to sell a product to customers, right? So advertisers fund commercial broadcasters. And there's a need of speed in commercial broadcasting where the first to get on TV, the first to get on radio can get higher ratings. So there is a speed to get that news out there. And when you have a speed to get the news out there, you may not check it as often. I think we're all in the same boat. We don't have that issue. We take our time in exploring the topic. For us, it's not about speed, it's about quality of covering a topic. So I don't have to meet a deadline at 5 p.m. I could wait to do a 6-minute piece on Morning Edition and take the time to explore that. And I think sometimes not having that need of speed allows us to kind of take our time and be more respectful
Yeah.
And yet, we all do national newscasts. And I think you know that PBS Hawaii doesn't have a local daily news department. We've put our money into children and teaching them how to use technology to create and share. And they do storytelling. They know journalism. They've actually taught. We're teaching them, and they're teaching us because they are taking news coverage slightly differently than we are. But we have the same standards of PBS NewsHour. And, I have to agree that it is so easy to know who your boss is when you report news. It's us. That's who you report to. And I feel really good. I thank you for being my boss because I can look you in the eye and tell you I think we're doing a good job. And it's true, we're not. You may think, okay, these guys are, they've got a little political slant there, or, commercial. They must need the money and accept some weird commercial gifts. It actually is not really true. I know in our case we depend on a lot of different revenue sources, so we're not wholly dependent on any one, and it really does help to protect us because, we are in order to survive and thrive, we have to hold our standards. And it feels really good to say no sometimes.
It does seem like a lot of the news out there has some bias to it. So what are you doing to make sure that your news stories are balanced, are unbiased? What are you doing around objectivity and trying to keep things objective?
Okay, is there such a thing as objectivity? Is my question.
I don't know. Is there?
I think it's hard to be, so being on the PBS and NPR side mostly, and I've served on the board of National Public Radio for 9 years, so I got a lot of those comments of, you guys are just a mouthpiece for the left. Interestingly, not a week goes by that I get a call from someone on the right that says we're too much on the left, so I think we get it from both sides. But the thing is that we are still humans. Our journalists are still human. Our newscasters are still human. And while they do, most of them do a really good job of trying to stay focused on the middle, their own personal experience tends to maybe kind of get in the way sometimes. I once was a speaker at a class for journalism, and I asked the question, why do you want to be a journalist? And I remember when I was asked that question when I want to get into journalism, probably Patti and Leslie were asked the same question. And one of the common threads was, I want to do good in this world. I want to make this world a better place to live. And anytime you go into a journalism job with that, which is fine, you're going to have a little bit of that bias built into your human being. That being said, again, because we are able to go in depth into a topic, you may tune into a radio show or a story on the NewsHour or read a story on Civil Beat, and because we're able to take our time on one topic for 3 minutes of a piece, you might just hear one side of the story. But if you stay with us for another 6 minutes, you'll hear the other 3 minutes of the story. Where in commercial broadcasting, you may only get 30-second sound bites, and it might sound a little bit different. But I have always worked very hard in my industry to make sure that we stay as close to the middle as possible and provide both sides. But it's hard because we're human, and we're going to sometimes put in our own observations into that talk.
Well, I was here in Hawaii when I worked for Bob Seavey in those days, and you have to look at who people bring into when you're doing a story. Who are you going to interview? And in the old days, every head of every company was pretty much Caucasian, male, older, and they did run corporate business, but Hawaii is about more than that, right? So I think I think there were a lot of viewpoints that got left out of coverage during times of objectivity. Our idea of objectivity depends on where you're from and who you think matters. So, and that's the question, right? Who matters on a particular issue? Who should you go talk to? And I'm not saying that there is any right answer, and that's what I look for. I look for who are they talking to, who are they reaching out to, because it's really tempting when one is a reporter to go to the usual suspects because you trust them, they're known commodity, they're going to have some factual information, they're going to give you a new viewpoint. On the other hand, it's the same suspects. And I think it's incumbent upon us to reach out, find more people. There are other people out there who think and know and have different aspects that we should know about.
So I completely agree with Leslie on everything that she has just said, especially about finding new sources and not going to the same usual suspects. But one thing, Civil Beat is a little bit different than what Jose described, because we're very upfront that we want to help make Hawaii a better place. And so we really do sort of look at how can we help affect positive social change. So we ask our writers to really try and do more of an analysis than maybe just the he said, she said kind of journalism, which we call ping pong journalism in my world. And so it's not a bias, and people often ask us about balance, and I think we'd rather talk about fairness, really, because balance is sometimes not helpful when you're trying to explain to someone an issue that's really important to understand. And because we do, as Jose pointed out, spend a lot of time researching and doing more in-depth and detailed kind of work, we kind of do know the answer, as to this is how this works, and this is how it's a credible kind of answer. So we will do more of an analysis piece than I think you might see elsewhere. But we do the straight ahead other stories, press conferences, and that kind of thing. But I think when we really get into our groove at Civil Beat, we're best when we're doing sort of investigative watchdog things that we really spend a lot of time on. But our sort of mission at Civil Beat, and we definitely are a mission-oriented organization now, is to help make Hawaii a better place. And there's lots of room to do that and not be biased, I think so.
Thank you. So each of you work in the digital space. I kind of want to take a moment to move towards this whole digital technology and how it's affecting news. All three of you are in the digital space. What do you think about print media? What's the future of that? And how have you changed with the needs of technology right now?
Wow, I spent many years in print media. The little opening story that you gave was, a print column called "Tell It to Bud," and I was Bud. And so much for transparency, right? But I think newspapers are going to be around for a very long time still. They're changing. They're cutting their staffs. The Denver Post just laid off 30% of its newsroom today, that comes on top of laying off 25% like last year, I think, or 2 years ago. And so they're just not able to do the kinds of specialty reporting that you used to see the big legacy news media do. And I'm only speaking to print. I'm not a broadcaster, so I don't really know what's going on in that world. But cutting back until basically you have a reporter who covers school board and one who covers city council, maybe one who covers the legislature and cops, courts, that kind of thing. And they just don't have time at all because they still have to fill a lot of space and write for their websites as well. So it's sad what's happening to all of my print colleagues, but more and more online sites are springing up from people who are getting laid off at the print media, and that's great because there's more news sources out there. But I do think print will still be around because that's where the money is. The revenue is still in advertising. It's not really in online yet, except unless you're the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so, that's,
Do you think newspapers will be able to support think pieces? And I would think that one really good use for newsprint would be think pieces. Because by the time you get the newspaper, you already know last night what happened on your phone, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I look for. I look for print magazines that'll enhance daily life, that'll broaden me, that'll deepen me, and I read them when I have time. But I notice I get the paper delivered every day. But I pretty much feel I've read it from my cell phone or iPad before I've gotten to work.
Yeah, I find myself reading more newspapers than ever before, but not with print newspaper. I've read the newspapers on my iPad or on computers. For us in radio, digital is impacting us in couple different ways. One, there's an expectation that we should be online. And so not only now do we report through terrestrial radio, and you get, 90, Hawaii Public Radio's news over your radio, but there's an expectation that you will also go and see it online and read the story and see the story. And then beyond that, we need to be on smart devices. So we now have an app that where in the radio world and in the old TV world, used to be very linear programming, right? We told you when you could watch a show, and we told you when you could listen to Morning Edition. Now you get to be the program director, and you decide when you want to hear that story or watch that show. So we have to make sure that those programs have to be in that digital space so that when you want to hear them, whether it's one story, one feature, a program, that they're available for you in an easy to use way. The other way it's impacting us is with our new listeners, our millennial listeners. We all grew up in this family listening to terrestrial radio, listening to those old tube radios, and listening to AM radio crackling at nighttime. The new generation of radio listeners don't listen to radio. They hear the same content, but they listen to it on smart devices. And that's a new space that we have to be in, just as Leslie has to be in, and Civil Beat is already in that space. They do that really, really well. We're catching up to the work that they're doing to make sure that we're in that space. So it's the having to be there for news content, but also being there for our new generation of listeners and users.
And actually, the digital part really isn't, as Patti mentioned, it doesn't really pay for itself yet.
Yeah, right.
It will. I mean, there are some news organizations that are doing really well with digital media, but so it's like we are living in a house while building onto the back, and pretty soon we'll be moving into the back. That's what it amounts to.
Well, and you brought up a good, interesting point, too, about what you're doing for the younger generation. Are there other things that you're doing in your news outlets to appeal to a younger generation, and how are you seeing them getting their news? And what kind of content are you trying to get to appeal to them?
Well, we have to be everywhere. So not only do we have to be on the radio and on our website, we have to have snippets on Facebook, on Twitter, to be where that audience is at. And that makes it difficult because the Twitter audience, they have a 20-second span. And trying to get content in 20 seconds is really difficult.
Well,
Facebook,
they did expand character limit.
Yeah, true. But there's an expense to being on digital, and there's not yet a return of that investment. To Leslie and Patty's point, but another thing that we're doing is we've started a new group, Generation Listen, which is made up of younger listeners, so that we meet with them on a quarterly basis to learn from them, and for them to learn from each other, and for them to learn from us as well. So at least we're reaching out to that group and trying to be proactive by learning from them while they're still in that infancy stage of learning to be a radio listener, and also to be a member, to be philanthropic and to give to an entity that they're supporting.
So we're really interested in the millennial generation as well, because I think just like you, Jose, our readership skews older, 55 plus. And so we're trying to build up our core younger readers. And to do that, it's interesting because when you talk to millennials or do reader surveys about the issues that they're interested in the same thing you guys are interested in, environment, politics, that kind of thing. So it becomes a matter of the presentation instead of basically the subject matter. So we're trying things with kind of short, snappy videos and that kind of thing that seem to be resonating a little bit. We're also trying with the podcast that we have, the offshore podcast, that's been hugely popular with the younger crowd. We do Instagram now. We're not really so much on Twitter in terms of news dissemination because Twitter's become mostly for journalists, to kind of talk amongst themselves. But our social media feed on Facebook drives people start there, and then it drives traffic to our website, and that's good. but we're Instagram, we sort of tried Snapchat for a while. There's all these other things that I had never heard of until someone in the office had to show me what it was, you know. But we really do want to engage younger readers. We are starting a millennial advisory committee, probably much like your Generation Next, where we just really want to bring them in and talk to them a lot about what it is they think, what do they do, what do they want in life, you know, so that we can help kind of craft stories that are really more for them, that are meaningful for them. So.
And same thing, we do the same thing with millennials, but we're also working really closely with Generation Z, which is the generation after millennials. They're born around 1996 and afterwards, so, and we've learned a lot about them. And this is, I love this generation. They remind me of the greatest generation, but they, you know, they've grown up with lots of economic collapse, and so they are worried about the future. They're mindful of the future. They believe in saving money. They care about older people. It's interesting because they also feel like they're so much to social media. They're people they've never met. They only know them online, but they feel that they can be their best friends. They feel like you can really know somebody just through social media. But they care about what makes people tick. So the stories they do in our Hikino statewide student youth network, or they conceive their own stories. They do stories on what interests them, as long as they hold up to the PBS standards. And they're really interested in authenticity and identity. Who are you, and why do you think what you do, and what have you been through? And they will ask very respectfully, but very directly, pretty much anyone they interview. They do it without judgment too. So the intermediate school students have talked to it, and we were nervous about this, and we were mentoring them along the way, but they did the first story on a transgender middle school student, and what was it like to be that person. They went to a severely disabled, developmentally disabled student in mainstreamed in school, and it was just I don't know, it was one of the best interviews I've ever seen. They said they wanted to know what it was like to be this boy. What was it like to be you, and to see the other kids going off to play? What kind of help do you need to live your life? What is the quality of your life, do you think? And what do you think, you know, what's next for you, and what would make you happy? We're seeing people who care, and they have empathy, and that gives me great hope. And these are the ones in high school now and just getting into college.
It's an amazing show. It's something that I actually tape every night and watch. And I think the other original thing about that is because we don't have a statewide TV network where, you know, we rarely get neighbor island stories, and Hikino is doing in-depth coverage on stories in communities about real people. And I guess that comes to the next question about content. A lot of times we're seeing a lot more syndicated content. You know, what are you trying to do to really make sure that we have local, meaningful content that's brought to our viewers, readers, to our audiences?
Well, for us, that's the most important thing I think that we do. We know that the majority of our listeners tune to Hawaii Public Radio for national stories, NPR and Terry Gross and Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. But we are only relevant if we are local, because you can get all that stuff. You know, here's a big secret: you can get all that stuff bypassing HPR. You don't have to really go to HPR to get it. But we are relevant if we are local. If we're giving you a local forecast, if we're talking about the farmers market that's going on down the street, and we're talking about what's happening in our community and covering the local news. And that's where we want to put our flag. We know we have a lot of competition with local stories, but we think we can be a very important player in the local scene by being in-depth, by being fair, by being balanced, and by covering those stories. So for us, that's where our biggest investment is going to be, because local is very expensive. We have to hire a staff. You know, we could buy a program for $5,000 and air it, but To do a good radio show, you have a producer, a host, and a couple editors, and that takes a nice investment for us to do. But we're growing, and that gives us the ability to be more and more local. That's where we want to be, not just in Oahu. We also want to provide coverage from the neighbor islands and have reporters on our neighbor islands as well to provide those voices back for the whole state to enjoy. Now, you're local like all the time.
Yeah, that's really all
Yeah,
we do. And so we have a staff of about 7 full-time reporters and some social media people and some editors who write. And with that, we produce about 4 to 6 original pieces of content a day, which is tough with a staff that size. I sympathize totally with Jose with trying to do that. But we supplement that with columnists like Denby Fawcett and Ian Lind and those people that you've seen a lot. We are beefing up our freelance columnists on the neighbor islands so that we can also bring more coverage to the neighbor islands. But readers tell us that they don't rely on us for national news at all, and frankly, even though we fund a full-time DC reporter, Nick Gruby has now moved to Washington, DC for us full-time because we think it's important to cover the federal administration these days in particular. And it's tough. I mean, we're the only Hawaii-based outlet with a full-time DC presence. But readers tell us they don't even really care that much about that. What they really want is local news from us and what's going on here in Hawaii. And so we try to do as much of that as possible with the sort of tools that we have. So.
And then we beg, borrow, and steal. So we partner with each other, and the wonderful, really terrific podcast that Civil Beat's done with Offshore. When I first heard it, I just thought, man, this is like great radio. And we chatted, we talked, we went out to lunch at your favorite Thai restaurant there in Kaimuki.
That's right, to Thai for.
And so now we're broadcasting Civil Beat's podcast that were first intended just for online audience, and we're now airing them on HPR, because that's truly local. That's local stories that they're doing, that they're invested in, that I can't afford to do. So we try to piggyback on that to I think great results. And I know we've talked about some partnerships that we'll be working on hopefully soon too.
And I got to say, when we started Hikino Statewide Student News Network, we really thought that it would fill in the gaps caused by the consolidation of media. We'd have more local news from communities through students. And actually, we got more than we bargained for, because now we hear from students in Kapa'au, Anahola, Milo Li'i, and it's amazing what training, we train teachers, and we help to, if the teacher wants us to, we'll talk to the students, but it's the teacher's class. But we have seen them do really wonderful work. The best story I've seen on the Mauna Kea controversy early on was from a 16-year-old student at Miloli'i Virtual Academy. It's a small school in Miloli'i. They meet at a beach pavilion, and very small, but he got amazing access to the scientists and to cultural practitioners as he was trying to figure out what's going on. He's a Hawaiian kid who just wanted to understand, where are we? And we see what they're concerned about in their communities. It's different from what we're concerned about. And that's what makes Hawaii so special. We have all these very different communities. So if you're covering Honolulu, you're not covering Hawaii. And we never forget that when we see what comes in from 90 schools, on 47% of which are on the neighbor islands.
Well, we could keep going here, but I really want to give all of you time to ask some questions. So I'd like to open it up to any of you.
Right, so it doesn't impact Patti at all, because she's not a public broadcaster. So those dollars, those tax dollars, which are about $445 million, are distributed by Corporation for Public Broadcasting. About $1.45 for each taxpayer goes into this pot of money. It's distributed to qualified public radio and TV stations. Our share of it is less than 5% of our budget, so it's about $300,000. We have built our station here at Hawaii Public Radio to be positioned that if that funding ever went away, that we could still survive. For some stations in the market, for some stations in the country, they rely on federal funding for 15, 25, 40%. Those are the stations that will be in danger. And what will happen is if those stations go off the air, it will create a domino effect because Leslie programming bill to PBS and my programming bill from NPR are all going to go up because the people paying for those shows are going to go smaller. So that's going to have a domino effect. TV stations get a little bit higher. Their grant's a little higher than radio, but their expense is higher.
We do video and audio.
Yeah.
More expensive.
But yeah, so what we're doing, there's NPR has someone who's working on the federal side, and PBS has APTS that does kind of lobbying for public TV stations. I'm not going to speak for Leslie, I'll let her say what they're doing. But there's an entity called Protect Our Public Broadcasting, Protect Our Public Media, I think that's what it's called now. So when it's the appropriate time, then we will let our listeners know to take action. It's hard for us here in Hawaii because we have senators that are already pro-public broadcasting. They're going to vote for PBS and NPR. That being said, while the administration always makes a lot of noise for defunding public broadcasting, members of Congress, whether they're Republican, Democrats, Independents, Greens, Yellows, Purple, they all see the value of public broadcasting. And the reason why goes back to that last question that was asked about local content. When that congressman goes back to their small town in Peoria, wherever, middle of the United States, they know that their PBS station is a local station. They know that their public radio station is a local station. And they're not going to do anything to impact the local content that we provide. So while there's a lot of noise on the top, down below in the chambers, I think we're pretty safe.
I'm on the board of the National America's Public Television Stations, so I've gone up to Capitol Hill a bunch of times and talked to a bunch of congressmen. And what's happening is what happens. This is a tougher year, but this happens pretty much every funding year. You've seen it every year. A group of people on the Hill wants to defund, and then a broadly bipartisan group says no. And the reason is, in the case of PBS, the reason is they finally realize what a good deal we are. And actually, obviously true for NPR, we cost so very little, in our case, to be America's largest preschool classroom. We leverage lots of private dollars and take that government money and we make it go far. So they finally realized, these guys aren't feeding at the trough, they're actually extending and providing education. So in the end, I believe sense historically prevails because it's not a waste of taxpayers' money. And we get 15% of our annual budget from the federal government, again, because TV is more expensive than radio. And the Officer of the Inspector General did a study, and he said that for many public television stations, there is no substitute for the federal money because much of that money goes into creating curriculum-based children's programs. Nobody else is going to do that. They'd rather build in product placement cereals with lots of sugar and put those in TV cartoons. But we do stuff based on educational curriculum. So I do think, and I'm an optimist. I think we'll come out well because it's smart. It's a cheap way to get quality education and solid news coverage.
Although it's a great fundraising tool. Because every time the administration says we're going to take away your money, listeners and viewers like you, members of our community, you stand up and go, no, public broadcasting is important to us and we're going to support it. So it does help remind our community of the value of that dollar that they're spending on us. I think we're a consumer-driven market. And in the end, consumers, our citizens, are going to determine what's worthy of consumerism. You know, what are you going to buy? What newspapers are you going to buy? What cable station are you going to tune into? What public broadcasting system you going to support? But I think it's dangerous for any government to start to dictate how journalism should be crafted. And I think we went a little bit down that scary path when members of the administration wanted to change slander laws and libel laws and make broadcasters, you know, liable to libel laws, I guess. That you start to go down a slippery slope when you know, the head of the government starts to say, this is fake and this is not, this is true and this is what we're going to listen to. I think the press and journalism should be driven by citizens of our nation. And because of that, you have to let the citizens kind of run that boat. And sometimes it's going to be bad stuff, and we've seen evidence of that, but a lot of times it's going to be good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's the First Amendment that really prevails in all of this, which is good and bad. You know, you do get people like our president saying things that just absolutely aren't true out there, but he can do that, you know, if he wants. The same as we can start our own website, or they can broadcast, you know, whatever they want. And so I don't see any move, and I haven't heard anything at all about any kind of trying to dictate free speech. You know, we see it through things more like Jose was saying, through different libel laws and those kinds of things. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
you
but
know.
it kind of go back to the code of ethics. You know, and Patti mentioned you should check the About Us on, you know, every source that you get. If you are, you know, if it's a prideful, trustworthy news organization, they're going to tell you that they abide by certain ethics, you know, codes of ethics. And if they're not, then that's where I would be, you know, I'd be cautious. So I think we kind of have to police ourselves.
That's really crazy. I mean, I have no idea how that is going to be even discovered. I mean, you know, when you see people posting comments or whatever, you have no idea who they are, even if they are using their real name. And so one of the reasons that we got rid of our comment section recently, one of the things that we were thinking was, how many of these people that we don't know who they are really part of these Russian troll factories, you know, or whatever. And I don't know that they would target an outlet like ours, but the point being, you just don't know who is out there and what and to provide a forum for that is, I don't know, we just wanted to rethink it a little bit, so. So one of the things that is a little bit interesting about Civil Beat is, well, so we started out as a for-profit, as you guys probably all know, but we converted to a nonprofit in June 2016, mostly because what we were doing, this whole sort of mission-driven news that we were doing, or mission strategy that we had, it just kind of fit better with a nonprofit kind of vibe, I guess. And so we've never had a retail strategy. So I think, Kelvin, what you're saying is, so we don't rely on ads at all. And even our sponsors and our funders are very hands-off. You know, we don't have any sort of you know, quid pro quo or anything like that with them. So one of the interesting things that happened when we converted to the nonprofit was, you know, you guys probably know that our main funder is Piero Midyar. And so when we were a for-profit, people said, oh, why should I buy a subscription? You know, that guy's a billionaire, he doesn't need my money, you know. But when we switched to the nonprofit, people just really bought into that idea of, this is a community organization now that we need to support. We support good journalism. We support the kind of work that we're doing in particular. And So I guess maybe that's the safeguard, is that as long as we're making a difference and that people can really see what we're doing and we're transparent, we post all of our donors online, we have our guidelines of how we work with funders and how publications should work with that. So I think a lot of it is just transparency, but it's really just building the trust of the community. So we are trying to do more and more things to get out in the community. We have sort of a new initiative we call Journalism Plus, where we take the stories that we've done and then try and figure out a way to do something to give back to the community. You know, if the community is going to support us, how can we support the community? So it's kind of a different concept because we can't lobby, we can't go down to, you know, the legislature and demand, you know, action or anything. So we're sort of feeling our way on that. But we have some ideas about how to just sort of help out without crossing a line that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, we certainly have a firewall between our donors and our content. We have a board that represents our community. We have a board of 19 individuals. We have a community advisory board that represents listeners as well. And again, you know, occasionally we'll have a board member that will send me an email saying, "Oh, you should cover this story. Can you give it to your news director, Bill Dorman?" I go, "I will suggest. You know, this is an interesting topic, but I will never order a topic to be covered because that's not the role of a donor." But as a nonprofit institution, we have many donors. You know, we have almost 15,000 listeners who contribute to Hawaii Public Radio. And we're beholden to them. We're beholden to our community. We're not beholden to a corporation that writes one big check to sponsor a show. Because if that one check went away, we might go out of business. So we're not beholden to corporations or advertisers. We are beholden to listeners and donors and this community, because we are a community licensee, and that's what also sets us apart from commercial broadcasters. And Leslie's station is also a community licensee. I'm a community licensee, and the big difference to that is that the license that the Federal Communications Commission gives us is held by you, the community. We are licensed to you, and you are represented by a board of directors. And that's a very important distinguish something that's different from commercial broadcasters that don't have a board of directors that represent the community. They're owned by a corporation miles and miles away.
And my experience is that, you know, when you think about, okay, corporate control, you know, people are going to try to control the message. When we do have to, you know, explain how the system works to people who'd like to advertise on PBS Hawaii, but I think they really like it, to be honest. They understand boundaries, and everybody adheres to the same boundaries. They know that if they decide to sponsor a program, it means no editorial control, and it means you have to have a much smaller, shorter plug, just your logo and just a 10-second comment that can't be a call to action. But what you get is a safe and sane, uncluttered space where people can hear themselves think, and they might pay more attention to the corporate brand because it's quieter here. So actually they know we're a different animal, and it's in our interest to make sure everybody adheres to that, and it's actually a pleasure to. And the business sponsors and other supporters end up feeling, I think they feel good about it. When I produced newscasts, a half-hour newscast, we took the feeling that we know there's a ton of bad news, but on the other hand, you're not looking for, when you turn on, you're not looking for, you know, grandma went and had lunch today. You want to know, what should I know? But we kind of took it as a newscast should be kind of like a person's day. You know, in every day some rain falls, but I mean, there's some good stuff and then there's some bad stuff, and you want to know about both of those things. So we try to show every side of the day. And every day you do face a challenge, and you need to know about it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ron. I think perception is reality, right? So if you perceive that all you get, that we as consumers are just getting negative news, we are. I think a lot of the coverage that our shows deliver tend to be all those topics that you talked about. However, we do, if you listen for the entire hour of Morning Edition or All Things Considered or Science Friday, you will occasionally hear that nugget, that little story that had nothing to do with what's happening in Washington, that might do with this person who's helping disabled people, and we cover that every Friday with Helping Hands. Dave Lawrence, every Friday we do a segment on Helping Hands that talks about how we as citizens are helping fellow citizens. So I think it's that heavy story that kind of floats to the top, because that's unfortunately that's what's happening every day. But I think if you stay with us long enough, you will hear those nuggets. We have to give you what you need and sometimes also give you what you want. And it's that balance of your need and want. You want something, but you also need something, and we try to balance both things. But it's difficult. I get it as a consumer. I get that too. I'm privileged because we have 2 radio stations, and I get by 10:30 sometimes I get fed up by hearing what's happening, and I tune to HPR2 and I relax with classical music.
But I do think that especially at Civil Beat, we could do a better job of doing more of the what's working instead of the what's wrong kind of stuff. And so that's one of our goals for 2018 is to try and do more of solutions-oriented journalism and try to do more, just sort of feature-type coverage. We sent a reporter and a videographer out to the Papahanaumokuakea and did amazing work out there in a slideshow that takes you 3 days to get through. There was so much material in it. But I think we want to try and do more of those kinds of things that aren't necessarily gotcha or trying to get someone fired or something like that. We still want to do that too, but I think we need to balance it out a little bit more. And so your point is very well taken.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, we're running out of time. So I just wanted to thank all of you for being here. I hope that this really gave you the opportunity to understand a little bit more about how we can find reliable news, and even more importantly, got a better understanding of the great work that these 3 leaders are doing at their respective outlets. So thank you very much for being here. If we could give them...
Thank you for having us.